What's up, ladies and gents? As promised, here is my main man, Erik Kramer. God, it's great to see you, Erik. Um, for those who don't know or don't remember, it's been a while, but that was one of our first big series here at Go Long, and to this day, it still boggles my mind. I can't remember anyone who has been through what Erik Kramer has been through, and we spoke for, I don't know, 2-3 hours, longer than that, with the phone calls that followed up. And I feel like it's still just scratched the surface because Erik has a must-read, phenomenal book out, The Ultimate Comeback. There it is, if you're watching on video. Surviving a Suicide Attempt, Conquering Depression, and Living with a Purpose. Erik, I have a million things I want to get into, but first of all, how in the hell you doing? It's great to see your face, your smile, your joy. You're in such a phenomenal place today. So, just fill everybody in that hasn't heard from you in a couple of years here at Go Long. How's life?
Well, life couldn't be any better, actually. So everything is going well. Obviously, you mentioned the book, The Ultimate Comeback, has been doing very well. And it's kind of just getting started in terms of talking about it and articles being done and interviews and so forth. And so, yeah, it's been a lot of fun that way. And I've got a couple of nonprofits that I've been working on these last, 3 or 4 years. And so one of them happens to be, it's a mental health program for kids and families, and called Mental Health Touchdown. We were gonna start it back in August, but then it's an after-school program for fourth, fifth, and sixth graders. But kind of got delayed with this book scenario, and then there's another one. It's a passing camp. It's an off-season one that's going to be for all positions, including centers. Probably by year 2, it'll be not just like the 7-on-7 people, but probably offense and defensive linemen as well, because there's a lot you can do there in a non-contact way. And so, yeah, that's kind of a little bit what's been going on. And obviously, we're in the holiday season, and so that's been a good time and good to reconnect with folks. I've got a friend in a band that I've known since I was 7 or 8 years old, and his band's really good. They're playing this Saturday night, and I sent out an email to probably 70 people I know. So if we can get half of them out there, that'd be great. And
what's the band?
It's called Black Canyon Band. And
okay.
Gary Usher is my friend. And I didn't know this at the time, but his dad was my youth football coach. And his dad was a successful music writer and producer. So he co-wrote some songs for the Beach Boys, apparently. And I guess he produced the Byrds and some other groups and Simon and Garfunkel later. And I don't know. But anyway, Gary's a very talented guy. So
everybody's connected to Erik Kramer one way or another. I mean, I listen to Adam Carolla all the time, and you and Carolla are old pals, right? And youth football growing up.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, Gary was on that team as well, and so you're right. There's a lot of interwoven pieces to all this. So it's been fun.
I don't even know where to start. I'll assume that a lot of people out there haven't heard your story or read your story yet, but I'll link it here on the site again to the fight for Erik Kramer's life. Obviously, you attempted suicide, survived that attempt, which we'll get into that. And that might not even be the craziest element of your story. I mean, everything that happened after that, you're coerced into a sham marriage. You kind of revert back to mentally being a little kid, right? So you don't really know what's going on in your life, going through the motions after this near unbelievably tragic attempt at suicide. I think you lost like $700,000 in the process of that all.
Something like that, yeah.
Just insane. But let's start at the start, because I really didn't know a lot about your upbringing and what led you to the NFL, because that story alone is inspiring. And surreal too. I mean, you were a high school defensive back, you play quarterback, you get to
Yeah,
Pierce Junior
yeah,
College, and
right.
you're a backup, and you had that epiphany, like, I gotta quit being selfish, quit having this big ego, and I think that switch alone says a lot about who you are as a person. And then you've got your parents, and that's a whole other dynamic. But how did you even
Mm.
get to the NFL?
Well, a circuitous route, obviously. It was not, didn't get drafted. And I even, I had a good college career. I was ACC Player of the Year at NC State my senior year. And, but, yeah, like I said, didn't get drafted and tried out for was it New Orleans Saints. And
Mm-hmm.
I knew the day I got there I was going to make it, but it was still, made some good friends while I was there. And, was back in school in time for the college football season to begin, and so I was back going to school and thought I was going to help out with the football team, and thought I was going to um, be a high school coach, and and
Right,
then
right.
uh, the strike happened in 1987. And so I got a few calls from some teams. Ended up playing for Atlanta for I think it was 3 games, and they ended up keeping me that year. I didn't play anymore that year, but um, and then the following year in training camp, I was the last cut because the Rams had cut both of their backup quarterbacks, and so Atlanta picked them both up, and I ended up waiting around for a few weeks. Nobody else called, and so I went up and played in Canada in the CFL. There was I think there were 6 games left on their schedule, and so I played. I came in at halftime or after halftime of the first game, and then played the rest of the way. Didn't do anything special, and then
Yeah.
ended up calling around to all the teams, and the Lions were the only team to give me a call back. And I guess through writing this book, I talked to June Jones, who was the receiver coach there, and I guess he had, going because prior to the Lions, he was the quarterback coach, offensive coordinator for the then Houston Oilers, and they drafted a receiver we had in the first round named Haywood Jeffries. And then even going back to the strike, he said, "Yeah, looked at some of that stuff and thought you could play." And so that's it was interesting because they flew me out there, and this is like in the middle of January, and so I'm sitting in the lobby, and it's at the Silverdome, and so back then there was, and probably even now, there was nobody in town to work out, and the turf in the Silverdome was rolled up. I don't know what they had something else going on, and I didn't know that at the time. And so the woman comes out and says, "Hey, you can sit in this office here." And this was Mouse Davis, was the offensive coordinator then. And I go, I'm sitting there for a few minutes, and he comes walking in. He goes, "Who are you?"
That's right. I love
So
that part.
I go, "All right, well, I'm just, I got called in here to come work out." And so he goes, "Hold on a second." He walks back out and he goes, "All right, how about we get in my car and you, June, and I will drive down to Ann Arbor." And so University of Michigan has an indoor, obviously, field. And I remember Alan Trammell was hitting like in the batting cage in one of the end zones. And literally my workout was me dropping back, and June would be standing around wherever he was, and I'd be throwing him the ball. That was my workout. And so anyway, that's how I got started.
Well, it's amazing too, because I believe, when you're trying to get back in the NFL after you had the little cameo during the strike, you
Mm,
busted out a media guide, right? And you're literally going team to team, just calling these teams.
yeah.
Said, "Hey, Erik Kramer here, would love to work out." And the Lions were the one team that
One
entertained
team.
it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get
Yeah.
out there and who are you? What are you doing here? Okay, I guess you made the trip from California. We'll do something.
Well, not just that, but so when so I they had a mini camp down in March down in Tampa Bay or in Tampa, and we had it. We were on the field at what was then the stadium for the old stadium for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and so the draft wasn't until the end of April, and that's when. So at the time there was Bob Galliano, Rodney Peete, and then me, and so the draft happens. And back then there wasn't like ESPN wasn't covering the draft, and so I had somehow heard that Andre Ware got picked with like the whatever pick, seventh pick, whatever he was, and I'm like, huh. All right, here's a guy who just won the Heisman Trophy, ran this offense in high school or in college, and so I'm like, I'm probably going to get a phone call here in about 5 minutes saying, "Hey, thanks but no thanks." But they didn't, and so yeah, they had mini camps and
He held out, right, which kind of gave you an opening to
well,
get some
it
real
did, and
reps.
so it kind of I kind of got rejuvenated, I guess, when I showed up. And, Andre, I don't know how to say this without saying, I don't want to be talking negative about him, but Andre wasn't the nicest guy in the world. And he kind of strutted around like he was it, which he really wasn't. And so he had a hard time playing catch, combined with the bad attitude. And then he held out, like you said. And so, but it was, you know, um, he didn't do himself any favors because it wasn't like he ingratiated himself to anybody. And he just had this air like he thought he was God's gift to football, which he turned out not to be. And so when you're not humble like that, and there's probably not much you're going to learn along the way, other than hard lessons. And so that's what happened. And so when he kind of played himself out, and I kind of played myself in, the combination of that is how that worked out.
I think too, you had that epiphany, that bad attitude epiphany earlier, right? I mean, you're at Pierce, and I really found that interesting where you're on the other side of the team on the sideline, distant, sulking, thinking you should be out there as the starter. And maybe take us through that. And I really cannot encourage people enough to buy The Ultimate Comeback and read it because, I mean, you'll finish it in a couple days. It's that easy of a read. You cannot put it down. And it's so conversational. It really is like Erik Kramer is just sitting in your living room telling his story. I love you're an incredible writer, by the way. And it's like you're talking with the reader and guiding them through this. And I found myself even laughing at times. You bring up the was it the deer tendon thing you drank once? I mean, you brought that up like later in the book. I'm laughing. Right. But yes, everybody out there, please read the book. But that moment in junior college where that struck me as a turning point in terms of football for you, where if you don't have that epiphany, nobody really hears about Erik Kramer beyond Pierce Junior College.
Right. And that's pretty much where the whole thing flipped is, and, I'll say this, like, we're all products of our environment growing up. And my dad was a double-sided coin. On one hand, he believed in me to the degree where everybody else must have thought at that time he was a knucklehead. Because there really wasn't much evidence to show that I was going anywhere. On the other hand, he also lived through me. But at the same time, he had a way of going through life where he was pretty good. Like the way he went about life, unfortunately for him, and this goes back to his background growing up, is he tried to make people subconsciously or consciously or unconsciously lived a life in which he tried to make people feel sorry for him. And so I kind of, in a way, followed that at Pierce College, where I thought I'd won this quarterback battle, like not even close. And the head coach didn't see it that way. And so it's not like we ever had a conversation about it. But anyway, like you were saying, we'd be playing games, and I'd be sulking down on one sideline, and every other Pierce Brahma was down at the other end, and so what would happen is when I would get in the game, my mind wouldn't be in the right spot, and so it didn't take me that long, maybe 4 or 5 games, and then I figured out, as much as I'm doing for myself, getting ready and preparing, I might as well help out Dave, who was playing, and so that's what happened, and it set me up for all things good in the future. Meaning, I shifted away from what was good for me as opposed to what was good for the team, and it's amazing how that works.
Your relationship with your dad, complicated, doesn't really do it justice, and your mom is as well.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I just think me and my dad are best friends. I call him every day. He's everything to me. And
That's great. Yeah.
how would you describe your relationship with your dad? Because you're right. I came away thinking, I mean, he's in the room with the Pierce coaches, right? Convincing them. By the way, growing up, he called it a loser school. He envisioned you at
Right.
USC, UCLA,
Right.
but then you don't even play quarterback in high school. They got you a DB, but he does got to talk them into giving his son a chance,
He does.
which does show a father's love. He's the only parent in the stands at practice, and you're like, Dad,
Yeah.
come on. You got to quit doing that. Then he's hiding in the trees, camouflaging in. And so that does, I think, speak
he
to the
looked
love,
at,
but
I would have to set his boundaries, right?
yeah.
And so, but he always thought those boundaries were dotted, and those lines were, and so that's what I mean. Like, he didn't have a way of going, oh, really? That's what it. How does this feel when I do that to you?
Yeah.
How does that feel? Like, there was never that, and it was like, oh, really? It didn't even occur to him that would be an issue. So then he found a way around what was that issue and made a new issue. Only it didn't.
He lived in chaos, is the way
It
you
didn't
describe
honor
it.
the
He needed
first one.
chaos and disorder. Yeah.
Right. And when you get around to it, I mean, he didn't have an upbringing anybody would want. No one. And, his mom apparently left him and his dad when he was 2 years old. And he told me he never saw her again, but that's not what I heard. I heard he did see her again, but didn't really like what he saw. And then his dad basically shipped him off to where his family on his dad's side is from Oklahoma, and so he grew up with his aunt's family, and never really had one of his own, and then didn't reunite with his dad until he started high school, and by then his dad was married again for the third or fourth time, and so anyway, like I said, it's not an upbringing I would have wanted, and I don't think there's a long list of people who would want that. And so, he didn't really know what being a dad was, and probably didn't know what being a husband was, and so, in those ways, he's passed away now, as is my mom, and in those ways, you have to have a soft spot in your heart for somebody like that.
Which says a lot about you, because he was unbelievably overbearing, even when you get to NC State and get to the NFL and ahead of the NFC Championship game, he's conducting national interviews, playing himself as the victim that you just kind of left astray. And I mean, I can't imagine processing that all before one of the biggest games of your life. So good on you, Erik. I mean, there is a lot there with that relationship. I encourage people to read, but you get to the NFL to fast forward again, and it's crazy. I mean, you're not that big, you're not that athletic, you don't really have that strong of an arm, but you're mentally tough, you're physically tough, and you're smart. How would you explain that near instant success? That when you get your chance, you reel off some wins, you lead this team, the Detroit Lions, to their first playoff win in 3 decades, and it's been 3 decades since. It's unbelievable.
Right.
How does that happen? Right? How is Erik Kramer the quarterback who pulls that off?
Well, it's kind of like, I guess, when you were talking, describe it, it's kind of like the overnight band success, right? That nobody's ever heard of, that's been playing in clubs for 30 years. And then all of a sudden, they come out with their 180th song that makes it to the top. Well, there was a lot of songs before that that got them there. And I think that's basically what happens is you're kind of,
Right.
you're everything in life and what you do with your life is always an evolution. And so you're always kind of getting a little bit better, hopefully, sometimes a little worse, or in fact, learning from your mistakes on the path as well. And so eventually you get an opportunity and it's the right one at the right time. And I always equate my career to, I'm standing in line and right then, something's happened to the guy that's playing, and the coach turns around and says, "Who's ready next?" And everyone else happened to be tying their shoes at that time. And then there I was, and that's kind of how it worked out, honestly. Um,
Yeah.
Good things happen from the very beginning, and but it's only because I was ready. It wasn't because I just kind of lucked into it.
I mean, you created your own luck, through hard work and selflessness and a lot of qualities that your dad didn't have.
Hmm.
Because you don't just get that call from Dave Wanstead, and hey,
Right.
here's an offer for what was it again? It was like 8 mil over 3 years, something like
Oh,
that. Which a
yeah.
lot at the
Hmm.
time.
Yeah, it was.
You
And
jump
a lot for a guy who didn't even, like you mentioned before. um, I was on the path to play quarterback. So back when I was in high school, they didn't have freshmen. High school was 10th through 12th. And so when I was a freshman, I played youth football. That was my last year. And then as a 10th grader, I started on JV, but then 3 or 4 games into it, broke a collarbone, I think, and was done for the year. Backed up as a junior, traded, changed schools as a, like in between my, 11th and 12th grade year, right in that second semester, went to a different school. Who, again, this was all sought after by my dad. I had nothing to do with this, and
right. He's
ended up
shopping you around.
right, and then ended up going to. I remember meeting. My dad and I met the head coach at that time, a guy named Bob Donovan, um, who I later found out after he passed away. After reading his obituary, I found out that he was a receiver at San Jose State on the same team with Bill Walsh, and
Yeah.
whatever. So I remember there's a you wouldn't know this being back on the East Coast, but out here there's a restaurant chain called Bob's Big Boy, and so that's kind of back then in Burbank that was like the spot, and so we met at a Bob's Big Boy, and anyway, next thing I know, I'm going to Burroughs, and there was a quarterback battle between me and a guy named Rich Strassu, which he was a good athletic quarterback in high school. He won it after I think we switched off for four games, I think. And then we didn't lose again. We went to the CF championship, lost there. But anyway, that was my sort of start to this whole thing. But I realized after a while that, what you have to do, in addition to everything physically, meaning running, stretching, lifting weights, all that, watching video, watching film, is that what eventually tied it all together for me was a guy named Kevin Wildenhouse, who was back then, when my first year with the Lions, I was on injury reserve. And back then, when you're in injury reserve, you're there all year. And so in practice, I had a hard time slowing things down mentally. So I literally went to the team internist, Dr. Birch, and I said, "Hey, here's what's going on." He says, "Here, go see this guy." And so that's a friendship that I've had now since then with Kevin, and it was this ability to sort of mindfulness, I guess, where you're kind of it's like like visualization exercise.
meditating,
Yeah,
visualization.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's guided imagery, basically, and a way to breathe that kind of allows you, kind of sets the stage for you to slow everything down. And so that's kind of how you want to go through life. And also, if you're playing a sport or whatever it is you're doing, if you can encounter the world like that, that's a good way to go through things.
I like the analogy that he used with you in terms of like being on an inner tube, kind of going down a river,
Mm.
and you've got to
Yeah,
avoid jagged rocks because that you're moving in one direction, but you still have to kind of avoid obstacles and avoid trouble. And it's a lot like playing quarterback in the pocket. That seemed to be a turning
yeah,
point for you in the pros as well. Like the kind of you've got blitzers in your face, you've got to dissect coverages. But you can't do one at a time when a play
right,
happens in 3.5, 4 seconds.
right. And so it's kind of like I envision this water sort of flowing down gently, not this rushing river. And because water, when it encounters something like a rock or a boulder, it doesn't stop and shift gears. It just meanders, and gravity takes it wherever it wants to go. And so that's kind of how you want to play. That's how I envision playing. And so everything really does slow down. And and I remember Kevin using some imagery like, um, if you were a camera lens, Erik, and you would go from, let's say, the play gets called, and as you're walking to the line, you begin to notice kind of not only the coverage and sort of this wide angle view, but you would also notice kind of, is the cornerback inside or outside? And are there any tips here that look like a blitz or not? And and so you kind of visualize what the play would be before you even call it in the huddle. And these are all things that kind of need a slowed down pace, but sort of in order pace to it as well.
I'm just so fascinated by mental health in the NFL because it's still stigmatized today, even.
Mm.
And guys have opened up to us about it. Khalif Raymond for the Lions, he was in a really dark place a few years back, and he got into the mindfulness with us, and that was
Mm-hmm.
such an important moment for him. He's muffing punts left and right. He's having these sleepless nights, and
Right.
I know he'd do these like float sessions and a
Yeah.
lot of meditation. And he kind of compared it to like I'm looking at it right now on my laptop. I've got Firefox up, and there's like 15 tabs. I don't need
Yeah.
those 15 tabs open. He's like, really, it's like you're kind of closing tabs in your life. If you can
Mm.
somehow just eliminate clutter and
Yeah.
focus on whatever's right in front of you, that goes such a long ways. And I don't know, it
It's
seemed like
really
that was
amazing how
what
the way
helped
I
you.
always looked at it, Tyler, was like, if you put in, I wasn't naturally flexible. So I began stretching. I wasn't naturally fast. So I began running. I wasn't naturally, didn't have a lot of cardiovascular like ability. So I started running distance and interval training. And then I wasn't very strong. So I got in the weight room. And so all those things didn't add up to uh, what I was looking for. What did was what was the glove that made all the fingers fit just right was Kevin Wildenhouse, and that putting it all together mentally, it's not just mentally, it's emotionally, and Kevin began to over time learn about what we've been talking about here about my upbringing and parents, and so kind of craft that with a few exercises as well. And so it's kind of like Khalif Raymond was telling you, how you're kind of being able to accept, but then close that tab, and look at this other tab with a little different set of understanding and perspective than you may have had before. That way you can close that one too. And if you want to open that back up when you're ready, fine, but it doesn't have to stay open. And so it allows you to really just focus on what's in front of you and not have to give any energy to, oh, there's these other things open that eventually I'm going to have to look over here while I'm doing this. And that's really what frees up the person to not just mentally, but emotionally focus in on the task at hand.
Because you got that contract from the Bears, and things started terribly in 1994. You had some rough games. You eventually benched, and you're
Yeah.
thinking this is it. And I think that was really your first bout with depression. And I'll just pull up. This is from Depression and a Mother's Love, page 100. You wrote, "Nothing felt adequate anymore. My marriage never did, but at this point, I was also discounting my abilities as a father, especially after Griffin's tenuous start to life." I mean, that's a whole story you get into as well. It was an unjust assessment, but self doubt rules every thought when you're mired in depression. I questioned my career and my capability to continue playing. My shoulder is healed, but will there be a lasting impact? Will I be able to effectively throw a ball again? My last start against the Lions suggested that I might not. Even if I can, will the Bears still want me? Will any team? What will I do with the rest of my life if I'm a washed up player at age 30? Instead of seeing the world and my life with a floodlight, I could only see them with a narrow laser beam that was fixed on the pain, sadness, and suffering. I lost my ability to see the big picture, alternatives to my problems, and any hope for a better tomorrow. Um, what was it like when depression first really worked its way into your life? Because that it seemed
Well,
like
if there was,
94 was maybe that first domino for everything
yeah,
we'll get
yeah.
into.
If there was a definite, if you looked up in the dictionary definition for depression, that'd be a pretty good summation right there. And it basically, you now live in, or I at that time now lived in a hole where there was no light, and you lose all perspective. Depression has a way of seeping in, and while you're not looking, it basically zaps you of all perspective it zaps you of the aerial view of your life, and it all this self doubt really creeps in, and the ability literally to go down and even want to eat breakfast is now gone. Get out of bed, gone. Although, got to be there in an hour. And so you still have to go. And being able to walk around and invest yourself in what you've always done in preparing and doing, now your motivation for doing that's gone. And so being able to keep moving forward during that time was very, very difficult. And as you mentioned, I remember, my mom and I, our relationship was altogether different than my dad's and I, and so we weren't close either for other reasons. And I remember talking to her during that time, and I don't know what I said, I don't know, but she just eventually said, "Look, I'm coming out there." I said, "Oh, okay, great." I don't remember what she did when she got out there, but my mom's pretty good at kind of walking into an environment, say a house, and just kind of sitting back and assessing, what can I do? And it wasn't like she came in and steamrolled everything. She just kind of, oh, maybe I can do this and do that. And remember, at that time, Griffin was maybe, um, what, a year and a half, maybe. And
Yeah.
and so anyway, so she found her way to helping with him and whatever else. And I'd say she was there, probably a week. But for her to put her own life on hold for a week was a big deal. And so, I that touched me, and it. I won't say that any one thing by itself helped turn it around, but I know eventually, talking with a therapist and some antidepressants definitely helped. And, just kind of a combination of, uh, kind of people, it doesn't take many, one, two people, and to kind of just continually to be there. And if you feel like talking, they're the person to talk to. And if you don't feel like talking, that's fine too. And so I think just eventually knowing that, and you don't know at the time, but depression is temporary. At least it was for me. And that's it's if you can get one or two people around you, whether it be a therapist, because they're the ones that are professionally trained at listening, and sort of insightfully listening to the point where they can have a suggestion or two that might give you a little bit different perspective than what you've got. In addition to that, maybe one or two at the most, three people that feel to you a safe place to land, that just by virtue of them listening, that's enough. And yeah, that's it's not anything earth shattering, but it can lift you out of the cage you feel yourself in. It will over time. And the hard thing with depression is there's no aspirin to take. It goes, oh, now I feel better. It doesn't happen that way. And so if you can just know that if you're patient and the people around you will continually show up for you, in time, this will get better.
And I would have thought that 1995 season would serve as that
Hmm.
cure-all injection, right? I mean, you set
Yeah.
Chicago Bears, the Chicago Bears, right? We're not talking about a team that's been around a decade or two. We're talking about the Chicago Bears. I mean, you set single season records for passing yards, 3,838, passing touchdowns, 29. You only threw 10 picks. I mean, it all kind of comes together in 95. But it's not like that just made the depression go away. I think that next year into 96, there's no explanation for it. It's just kind of how you're describing it. It just kind
Yeah.
of seeps back into your mind. And I don't know where you want to take it from here, but I mean, your NFL career continued for a few more seasons. But
Mm-hmm.
how did that depression just kind of linger and linger and linger to the point where, all right, now these suicidal thoughts are a little more real than they were in 1994?
Yeah, well, I never had depression. And if I had to guess here, I'd say probably 7, 8 times. I'd never had a bout that at some point or another didn't have an accompanying thought of suicide. The two kind of, for me anyway, kind of went hand in hand. It's not like every day, but it was like, this is really hard to get through a day and have a thought that feels good in any way during a part of a day, have it, that day something happen that's good. And how long do I want to keep doing this? Um, and it's almost like I'd be doing everybody a favor if I wasn't here. Eventually, because if you're your own counsel and you're only your own counsel, um, that's the worst person you can actually rely on. And so, how this stuff happens and how this comes back into being, I don't know. And that's why I would say that the thing to do is be proactive and not wait, and have those, start to observe people. You do anyway. So observe those that seem like they could be somebody that would be that active listener, the active, non-judgmental kind of, um, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Empathetic, right? Someone that can empathize with what you're doing and saying, put themselves in your shoes, and listen from that perspective, and maybe have a way of help guide you in a way that says, "Hey, I'm willing to be here anytime this happens, day or night, doesn't matter. I'm the person you call." And so you want 2 or 3 of those ahead of time, like just as part of your daily life. And then that way, if at some point life kind of starts to go severely downward, before it gets too far, someone's going to notice that you don't quite seem the same. They might ask you. They might not wait for you to ask. They might not wait for you to come to them. They'll ask you first. And that's the way this, building your own little home team, even as a kid, to me, is the way to go about this.
I know we're fast forwarding a little bit. I don't want to skim past anything that you'd like to get into. Again, everybody's going to buy the ultimate comeback and get every detail. But what really led you to that hotel room? For those who didn't read the series,
Yeah.
to the point where you're checking into a hotel with the full intent to shoot yourself and end
Mm.
your life.
Yeah. Well, what led to that were several instances or several things. I was done playing. I was working at Fox. Had kind of coached both of my sons through their youth football years. During that same time, I was had a little passing camp going on with former teammate Curtis Conway and that same former junior college coach Jim Fenwick, and um, then again, kind of transit during that time was working with Fox and doing games and everything, and then my mom. This was back on Mother's Day. So she was a golfer. She's actually better than me. And we went out to golf one day, and it was Mother's Day. And she goes, as I'm walking in the car, she says, "Hey, I'm gonna get some tests back tomorrow." And I said, "Really? For what?" And she says, "Oh, I just really haven't been feeling all that great." I said, "Oh, okay. Well, let me know the results." And she calls the next day, and she says, "Okay, sit down. I've got stage 4 uterine cancer." And so, what? Uh, and so then there was, she was married at that time, and her and her husband Doug found an oncologist, and they did some wicked surgery where they had to remove parts of more than one organ, and that nearly killed her, but it didn't. And so, she recovered, and I don't think she ever went back to work, but or maybe she did. I can't remember. In any event, the cancer returned, and then she began her. Around that time is when she would have doctor visits that I would take her to. She would have her chemo, which I would stay overnight with her in the hospital for, and and she was doing okay there for a while, and then uh, in um, in October, Griffin, my wife and I, Marshawn, were separated at that time, and uh, uh, Griffin chose to live with Marshawn, and this was after he had come out of this outpatient program at Visions, where he would live at home, and then pretty much be gone all day at meetings. And eventually there was sort of this individualized school that he would go to that started giving him some belief in himself again. And then, but I could see he kind of had his eyes on the finish line, so to speak, and which he was done about, I don't know, February, March of that year in 2011. And then October 30th, I get a phone call from the sheriff's department, but it was in the morning and wouldn't tell me what's going on. So I walk up these steps at the local sheriff's department, and before I even could get in the door, the officer walked outside and said, "Your son didn't make it through the night." And I said, "What?" And I said, "Yeah, he passed away." And so we literally drove to that house that it happened to occur in. And, it's just tough. And then around about 8 months later, in July, my mom eventually passed away. And she had home hospice for about 2 or 3 days. And I remember the doc. She was at West Hills Hospital, and the doctor grabbed a few of us that were in there and said, "Okay, it's time. She's not going to make it, so she can either stay here or she can go home and have home hospice." So we all go back into her room, and the doctor basically tells her, those little triangle bars that hang down over the head of the bed. As the doctor is telling her this, she starts doing these, pull-ups. She goes, "I feel good." And so unfortunately, she didn't make it. And then around that time that she passed away, my dad had some untreated acid reflux. that eventually turned into esophageal cancer, and which was about a 3-year steady decline. And there was, for him, no getting out of that. And so it's just kind of the feeling I had at that time was that all the significant people in my life were going that way, and there was really no one left coming this way. And that's not a ship that turns around easily. And so that led me to, of all places, the Goodnight Inn. And Dylan wasn't living with me either, and he was living with Marshawn. And unfortunately, this gave me too much time on my own hands to contemplate and then fully go execute and exit. So I didn't want Dylan walking into my house with that scene. And so I had purchased a gun, and I, of all things, go to a shooting range, like shooting down the range. And, what I was going to do had nothing to do with that. And so, but the fact that I'm still here, because I forget what day it was, August something. Turned out it was the day before Dylan, my youngest son's first day of school. He was going to be a junior in high school. And so, yeah, it's just, again, you lose all perspective and you don't think, what's this going to do to everybody else? Because, for the person who does commit suicide, it's over. Everybody else, it's just beginning. And so thankfully, through some unbelievable doctors and the support of those around me, here I am. And I couldn't be more grateful. I don't feel any regret, because you only make the decisions you have based on the information and how you're feeling and the thoughts you have at the time. But I'm so grateful that what I did I wasn't successful at. And so now I get a chance to be here for all of them and do some good with what would be the ultimate second chance.
I was going to say, there's a reason that you survived that attempt. I mean, you are going to help thousands upon tens of thousands of people who may be having similar thoughts. And I'm sure people are listening and thinking, how does one go to shoot themselves in a hotel room and survive? I'd imagine that night is a little difficult to recall, Erik, but logistically, how in the hell did you survive?
I don't know.
Did the doctors tell you? I mean, because I know that the reconstructive surgery was pretty intense, right?
Yeah. There was a time when, like, if I turn to the side here, like, there was part of my forehead. See, I think it's on this side. Part of my forehead missing. So literally, my head went back that way. And this is not mine. This is like some, I don't know, high tech plastic. And so I remember a friend of mine, Anna, who she's, someone that we went to high school together, and I'm her oldest daughter's godfather. And so Anna, who's been there every step of the way, she takes me to a revisit with the doctor who had done the surgery that night. And so what had happened was they opened my head up, and eventually my brain began to swell. So they had to close me back up, and couldn't do what they needed to do that night. And it took them, I don't know, 2-3 days later. And so I go back for this visit, and we're sitting in the doctor's, in a normal office, patient room. And he's asking me some questions, and he's standing off to the side, and I'm kind of talking this way, and I look up, and it's like his jaw is on the ground. I said, did I say something wrong? And he goes, oh, no, sorry. He goes, you have to understand that people that were in the situation you were in aren't usually back here talking to me about it later. And so that just goes to show you, it showed me, and that, you know, um, I'm a lucky guy. And to go back to that that scenario where, I had gone to Detroit as part of a way to publicize this book. And one of the interviews I did was a woman named Jen Hammond, who had been waiting for this book to come out. She was WGN for a couple of years. And so she comes, and there's a hotel room I've got, and we're sitting apart across from each other. And she says, normally you would start an interview kind of chronologically, but I'm just going to start at the end. She goes, you weren't supposed to be here, were you? I go, I guess you're right, but I am. She goes, why do you think that is? I go, well, because I think I'm here to help people. Now, 4 or 5 hours later, I'm in that same hotel room, waiting to do another interview of some kind, and the phone rings, my cell phone. It's a former Lions teammate. And he's like, Brass, this is Larry Tharp. And he had never called me a day in his life. And he goes, I have to tell you something. He goes, I've been trying to get a hold of you like for days now. He goes, I even wrote something on your Facebook. And I go, yeah, I'm sorry, Larry, I don't check it. and so he gives me the scenario where he wanted a divorce from his wife, and she starts going crazy. She starts scratching herself up. She calls 911. He gets arrested for domestic violence, something he didn't do. And he goes, I'm talking to you right now with an ankle bracelet on. I can't leave the state. And he goes, I talked to other people about it, and they're like, Larry, it's all going to be fine. He's like, maybe for you, maybe this Tuesday for you is going to be fine. For me, I got an ankle bracelet on. I can't leave the state. And so, here it is. She goes, why are you still here? Well, that's why. And part of the reason why. And so it's just, it makes me feel good because I originally wanted to do this for Griffin and Dylan. And so the trickle effect is that, I've been getting a lot of feedback from people who've read it, who are friends of mine. One night I'm watching some Netflix show, and a text comes in. It's from a very good friend I went to college with. And he says, I've never read one book cover to cover except this one. And he goes, I always looked up to you and respected you based on who I thought I knew you were, having no idea this all happened. And so anyway, it's been good because I think, as you mentioned, this little story here has positively affected some people in a very good way.
And it's only possible because you are so raw and open. I mean, you don't hold anything back. I mean, really, I mean, it is from your childhood to today, you just bury your soul. And it's really kind of a journey of the mind, really. I mean, football is a part of it here and there, but really you really take everyone through mentally where you're at your entire life. And so this book is going to help. There's non-football fans reading. I think it transcends sports. Everybody should get this book. Everybody should read it, because then even after you survive that, for those who don't remember, I mean, the surgery is amazing, and looking at you now is just how I looked at you a few years ago. You'd never know anything happened. Even speaking to you shortly after the suicide attempt, you'd never really know. But that wasn't the case mentally, was it? I mean, you weren't Erik Kramer, and then
because
try to take advantage of that.
With a people can see if you've got a broken arm, you got a cast on. You got something going on with your brain, no one can see it, and so you would have to kind of have known me to know that after a few minutes, he doesn't quite sound right. We were just talking about this last night. So Anna and I went over to my aunt and uncle's house, and we're talking about this. And it's, you know, if you were around me and you had some bad intentions, meaning if you wanted to take advantage of me, I was very easy to take advantage of, and was. And then, but, you know, those people around me, like Anna and other family members and friends, knew that, you know, this is the time that someone like me needs to be looked after. And in many ways, the justice system prevented that from happening. And so, and they were part of the ones that took advantage. And so it's not limited to the people who do it illegally. It includes many people who steal illegally, but they themselves don't look at it that way.
We want everybody to read it, but if you could sum up that stage of your life, Erik, to the extent that you can, how difficult was it? And in many ways, I feel like everything that you had to deal with after the good night in was just as bad, because your life is slipping away from you, and there's not anything you can really do about it.
No, and it's kind of like, I guess the way I equate it now is during those years, let's say from, you know, whenever it was I woke up to, let's say 2019-ish. So there's a good stretch of 4 years in there that I don't really remember a whole bunch. And what I do remember, I might not remember accurately. And I equate it to, like, let's say a 7 or 8 year old. You know, if you were to take me by the hand and we're going to walk out the front door, and as soon as we get to the sidewalk, while we're in the house, you say, when we get there, we're going to turn left. But by the time we got there, I would have already forgotten that. You say, we're going to go right. Oh, okay, we'll go right. And so from that 7, 8 year old, if you said, if you had taken all the toys I had in the world at that age, would I have even cared? No. Now, when I'm 12 or 13 and I look back and I find out what you did, now am I going to care? Yeah. Because now I've got my faculties about me again. And so that's kind of how it worked, is that, you know, there was only so much the people around me were able to protect me from, because the legal system had their hand in the cookie jar also. And it's just, and that the idea is with all of this book is just the first of many things coming. But ultimately, what I want to do, and what Anna and I together want to do, is enact or change laws that are already on the books that don't have enough teeth to them, or ones that don't exist need to. And so we started making some headway with that here in California several years ago. But the guy who is actually from this area, Van Nuys, he was the California State Senate Majority Leader, Robert Hertzberg, and so he left that position. But he also put us in contact with other people that I think are on that same train. And so you can't let these people that hide behind their legal profession or professional fiduciary bureau or California State Bar, you can't let them continue to, in their minds, do their job while stealing legally from people. Can't do that. So the best way to do it is to, you know, with the use of media and other avenues, is to shine the light on the cockroaches. And because there's plenty of them out there.
I tell you what, you gave me an education when we spoke. I think that was maybe part 2 of the Fight for Your Life that we ran, and I had no idea how conservative. I'm going to mispronounce it. Conservative.
Want me to help you?
I need a little help.
Conservatorship.
conservatorship. There we go.
Because I've
I
lived it
had
so
no
long,
idea
I can
how
now say it, no
the
problem.
tentacles.
It
Yeah,
is.
I mean,
It-
it's unbelievable how bureaucracy works
and all these
to
people within
steal,
that system,
to
and
ruin your
all
life.
these people, right? And all these people, whether they be lawyers, professional fiduciaries, um, people within companies, um, trust departments, officials, whatever, they all use your incapacitation to protect themselves.
Yeah.
And think about that. If I watched this documentary, this docuseries, and I can't remember the name of it right now, The Guardians, and
Mm-hmm.
it was about the conservatorship system, what they call guardianship in the Vegas area, Cook County, and Nevada, and it in there they're talking about this is the fastest growing industry in America because you've got the only way to be conserved is to be have some medical brain injury or incapacitation. That's the only, you can't get in there. Let's say you chop an arm off. That's not going to get you into conservatorship. What is your mental deficiencies, which think about that. You've got somebody who's got some money in the bank with some mental deficiencies and a system in place under the guise of we're going to protect you, but really we're going to drain everything you have while protecting you. It's diabolical and it's legal.
Yeah, because I think you estimated Courtney,
Yep.
quote unquote thief who coerced you into this marriage, probably stole about 300,000, but then it was the legal system that stole
Yeah,
about 400,000.
that's right. That's right. But they don't see it that way. But I do. And so
Yeah.
yeah. And so it's really just a matter of in addition to this book, shining a light on what hasn't so far. There's been some cases, don't get me wrong, there's across America, there have been quite several, and over the years. And this is, like I said, this is a big issue. In fact, there was a movie about this. I think it's called like Care-a-Lot. It's and the woman that was, I forget her name now, but you would recognize her name. Anyway, so it's slowly but surely coming into the consciousness of America, but not yet enough.
And thank God you eventually did wake up, and thank God for Anna. I mean, she
Yeah,
really was the hero in this story to kind of help you connect dots and realize what happened over those 4 years. So, I mean, we get into the painstaking detail. It's in our series, and of course, there's a heck of a lot more in the book, which I cannot recommend enough. It's just great to see you in such a good spot, Erik. I mean, really, even since the first time we met on a Zoom, that was 2020, so it was kind of fresh then. You're right in
right.
the throes of everything still. It seems like everything has only gotten better and better, and you're in a great place today, would you say, in terms of waking up in the morning and just being excited to attack the day?
Yeah, I do. I feel great. And like you said, sometimes, at least in my case, all that was needed was time. And so here we are. What was it? It was August in 2015 where I did shoot myself, and now we're in 2023, a good 8 years later, and I feel like back to normal. And it took probably wasn't long before you and I spoke. I'd say maybe a year before things started to really get back connected for me mentally. That's a long time, right? That's 4 or 5 years. And but scientifically, you talk to neuropsychologists. There was one connected with me, Dr. Tomaszewski. He says, yeah, for the initial recovery period, we're talking 2 to 3 years. That's the initial part. But for you to kind of get back to normal, if there is one, now we're talking, 4 or 5 years, which is right about that time.
And now you're changing lives, which is amazing. And can't thank you enough, Erik. This was
Well, I
awesome.
can't thank you enough, really, Tyler, because you were the guy that kicked it all off in terms of doing the most kind of thorough 3-part series on this, even to this day. And like you just mentioned, things are getting better, and the wheels are starting to turn, and there's a lot of good that's going to come out of this. And so I really thank you for helping to get that started.
Oh no, the gratitude's all here. I think anybody who hears your story in any capacity, they can't help but come away but want to be a better person and to live life for today. And I think that that's what people are going to get out of this book. I mean, living with a purpose. I'm glad to have that in the subhead. It's so true. Like you really found your purpose in life, and it's such a great message for everybody out there. So do yourself a favor, go on Amazon, wherever you get your books, and add The Ultimate Comeback to your library. Let's do it again soon, Erik. It's so great to see you, man.
Awesome. Thank you, Tyler. Appreciate everything. Good luck with obviously what you're doing. And hey, we'll hope to see. I'll be on radio, bro, out there at the Super Bowl in Vegas. So hopefully you'll get out there too.